All right, board gaming enthusiasts, we're going to ask the question here, exploring the titles in your collection. Random-based dungeon crawlers. What are some good titles, and why don't we see more of them, in my opinion? And in terms of a random dungeon crawler, I define that as being able to generate a random map, random encounters where you have to make it to the exit or you have to fight a boss at the end, meaning I know what the scenario is, but the exact layout and how it goes about and what I encounter, it is different every single time. So what titles out there exist like this? And I'm going to draw from my collection two titles that I feel are very, very strong that offer this. Both of them are unfortunately out of print, but they are solid and there is some still unique opportunities to obtain them. So let's talk about dungeon crawlers. If you've been following my channel for any amount of time, you know that I love dungeon crawlers. It's that duality of miniature-based fantasy gaming, Dungeons and Dragons, being able to pull down a board game and enjoy and get that experience. And while I understand the importance of a campaign, I want to have a story, I understand the value of fixed missions. As an author, as a game designer, as a play tester, I understand that team working together, you want to pull out the best of the narrative. You want to pull out the best of the rules. You want to highlight certain aspects of a scenario, a fixed scenario where the map is laid out, the monsters are already pre-populated, and the objectives known. That's important. The challenge here is after you've played through the mission a few times, we get into replayability. And there's a couple of games where I love the narrative of the game and I love the rule set, but you played through the missions 5, 6, 7, 8 times. You take a break, you come back, you take a break, you come back. It does get a little stale. On a side note, this is why I believe for expansions, I always try to get the character packs first, because one of the ways that you increase replayability, even after you know the mission, even after you feel you've mastered the mission, by having different characters beyond the starter characters or the stock boxed characters, you can try different teams. You can try 4 characters, 1 character. You can mix and match the type of characters that you normally play. You could switch out and try some characters that you never play. That offers massive tactical flexibility and replayability. But then this jumps into the random dungeon crawler. This idea where I know the rules, I know most of the monsters in the box set, but to have a random layout, it has the possibility to catch me off guard. The challenge here that I've noticed is, it's hard to do it well because as a game designer, you can't always control all of the random possibilities. And some might be a little bit harder based on how things lay out. Some might be a little bit easier. So it's harder to set the challenge level. So the two in my collection, 2 titles that I really enjoy. The first, Descent, 2nd edition. It's out there in the wild. It's still obtainable secondhand. There are still some new copies. The core box with the add-on deck to randomize the dungeon. It takes the Overlord versus the party, turns the Overlord into card-generated dungeons, and you fight your way through. You fight some monsters, you get some loot, you explore some chambers, you fight a dragon at the end, and you win. I love the idea of the random dungeon crawler because Descent is an engine. And we'll see if, I know we're not calling it Descent 3rd edition, but the new big box, we'll see if it does this. For me, what worked for Descent 2nd edition was the fact that it didn't excel in any one area, and that's not a criticism. It did just enough in every area. And when you pulled that together, it made for a very, very satisfying experience. What I mean by that is it had just enough character leveling up in combat. It had just enough loot. You picked up a couple of items, you got some loot. It had just enough exploration. It did everything just good enough. I guess it was like the Bard of dungeon crawlers, in that when combined with the random dungeon experience, I could sit down and I could play it. The second title. Now, ironically, these are both Fantasy Flight games. This title is also out of print, but there are still a ton of new copies out there available at a reduced price. Warhammer Quest, the card game. This was a title that was short-lived. produced by Fantasy Flight Games, licensed by Games Workshop, and of course Games Workshop pulled that all back. This is a card-based dungeon crawling system. Now, I'm all about the miniatures. This title really took me by surprise because I'm all about the miniatures. I love having the outlay of a dungeon and seeing it unfold. The feeling of that this game captures perfectly in a small, fast-play card format. And there are, of course, reviews out there. But essentially, there's a deck of locations. And you flip over a card, and it tells you the location. It's a little bit abstract, like it might be like a ruined bridge or entering into the sewers or kind of an unknown dungeon. And there's a couple of quest modifiers, and there's some monsters you have to fight and tokens you have to explore. When you've explored enough of the card, you flip it and you flip over a new card. So you have to progress through a number of cards. While that's happening, of course, monsters are spawning and they're card-based and they have abilities, so you fight them. And then, of course, you can search and draw from a search deck of different cards. It is a campaign-based game. There are scenarios, but there is a very, very powerful and potent random dungeon crawler generator. You're essentially taking your quest characters and going into a dungeon. The fact that it has random magic items, the fact that it has random event cards, random locations, random monsters, essentially random everything. And it plays out in this dungeon delve, plays very, very fast, small footprint. In my opinion, is a very, very strong title and a great example of a random dungeon generator engine set in the Warhammer Quest universe. But those are two examples of go-to games that I really, really enjoy playing from that random perspective. So now I'm going to turn it over to you guys for suggestions, and I'm always following up on suggestions. I have to say, a lot of recent titles in my collection are based on your recommendations. And two of those titles, honestly, I don't think I would have discovered necessarily on my own. So I really, really appreciate the feedback, your opinion, and titles in your collection. Random-based dungeon crawlers. Either that's the focus, that's the mode, or dungeon crawlers that have a campaign, that have a set mission, but also offer that random play.